I didn't cry when my father looked at me and said, "Get out. And don't ever come back." I smiled. Because in that moment, standing in the marble foyer of the house he built to prove he was powerful, I realized something he never understood about me. He thought I was weak. He thought I didn't have the temperament for law. He thought I was too emotional, too soft, too female. What he didn't know was that I had already built something he couldn't control. Something bigger than his firm. Bigger than his legacy. Bigger than his name. The next morning, while he was toasting my brother at a country club full of Connecticut's legal elite, I was signing documents for a $65 million mansion in Malibu. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about silence. It's about strategy. It's about what happens when a woman they tried to erase decides to let them destroy themselves. If you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, told you weren't enough, this story is for you. And before we begin, I want you to do something. Like this video if you believe silence can be stronger than screaming. Comment where you're watching from, I read every single one. And subscribe, because stories like this don't just entertain, they remind you who you are when the world tries to shrink you. Now let me tell you what really happened the night my father threw me out, and why losing his house was the best thing that ever happened to me. My name is Evelyn Whitmore, and I was raised in a house where silence was a survival skill. Growing up in Connecticut, inside a colonial mansion that smelled like polished oak and old money, I learned early that approval in my family was not given, it was earned. And even then, it was selective. I valued excellence, precision, discipline. I studied harder than anyone in my class. I graduated at the top of every program I entered. I memorized case law at 16 just to impress my father. I thought if I spoke his language fluently enough, he would finally see me. But what I loved most wasn't law. It was patterns, systems, data. I liked understanding how things connected beneath the surface, how decisions created consequences. At dinner, I would watch him more than I spoke. The way he held his wine glass. The way his jaw tightened when I challenged an argument. The way he interrupted me but never interrupted my brother. I wasn't loud. I wasn't rebellious. I was observant. And observation is power, if you're patient enough to use it. The night he told me to leave, he thought he was ending my story. What he didn't know was that I had already started writing a different one. My father, Charles Whitmore, built his reputation the way some men build monuments, obsessively, defensively, and always with his name carved in stone. Senior partner of Whitmore and Hale. 40 years in litigation. Feared in courtrooms across Connecticut. Respected. Untouchable. At least, that's how he saw himself. At home, his authority was absolute. Conversations weren't discussions, they were lectures. Opinions weren't exchanged, they were corrected. And legacy was everything. But legacy, in his mind, had a gender. My brother, Daniel Whitmore, was the heir apparent. 2 years older than me, charming in public, careless in private. My father invested in him like a long-term asset, elite schools, private mentorship, immediate placement inside the firm. Me? I was tolerated. "You're smart," he would say, swirling bourbon in his glass. "But you don't have the temperament for this profession." Temperament. It was his favorite word. What he meant was, you don't intimidate. You don't dominate. You don't command fear. I didn't argue. I watched. Because the more he underestimated me, the more freely he revealed himself, his biases, his blind spots, his weaknesses. Power always exposes itself to the person it believes is harmless. And in that house, I was invisible. Or at least, that's what he thought. The first injustice wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came disguised as advice. I was 23, finishing my second year of law school. I had just received the highest grade in corporate ethics, a subject my father claimed only serious minds understood. I remember walking into his office with the paper in my hand, expecting, not praise, just acknowledgement. He barely looked at it. "That's nice, Evelyn," he said, eyes still on his phone. "But grades aren't the real world. Courtrooms are different. You don't have the stomach for confrontation." I stood there, paper trembling slightly between my fingers. Daniel had just failed securities regulation the week before. My father called it a temporary setback. He hired a private tutor for him that same afternoon. For me? A warning. You should consider estate planning. It's quieter. More suitable. Suitable. That was the first cut. Not because he doubted me, but because he never doubted Daniel, even when he had proof he should. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying his tone. Calm. Certain. Final. And for the first time, a dangerous thought crossed my mind. What if the problem wasn't my ability, but his need to keep me small? The humiliation came wrapped in crystal glasses and applause. It was the annual Connecticut Bar Association gala, chandeliers, tailored tuxedos, women in silk gowns whispering about mergers and verdicts. My father loved events like that. Rooms where his name carried weight before he even spoke. Daniel had just been officially announced as the newest junior partner at Whitmore and Hale. It was absurd, he barely met the requirements. But no one questioned Charles Whitmore publicly. I stood beside my mother, Margaret Whitmore, who smiled the way she always did, politely, cautiously, never disruptively. Then my father raised his glass. "To legacy," he said, voice steady and proud. "To my son, who will carry this firm further than I ever could." Applause. Then he glanced at me. "And to Evelyn," he added lightly, as if remembering an afterthought, "who decided law might not be her true calling after all." Soft laughter rippled through the room. My throat tightened, but I didn't react. I didn't correct him. I hadn't left law school yet. I was still enrolled. He was announcing my withdrawal before I had even made the decision. Publicly rewriting my narrative. Daniel smirked into his champagne. I felt the shift then, not anger, not even shame. Something colder. If he wanted to decide my future for me, maybe I would let him think he had. The explosion happened 3 weeks later. I confronted him in his office at home, the one lined with mahogany shelves and framed verdicts. I asked him why he told the entire legal community that I was leaving law school. He didn't deny it. "You were going to quit eventually," Charles said flatly. "Better to control the narrative now than watch you fail publicly." Fail. I told him I wasn't failing. That I ranked near the top of my class. That professors had encouraged me to pursue litigation. He stood up slowly, towering over his desk. "This profession isn't about grades. It's about dominance. And you don't have it." Daniel was in the doorway, listening. Then my father delivered the sentence that had been building for years. "If you don't believe in this family's direction, then leave. Get out. And don't come back until you're ready to admit you were wrong." Margaret said nothing. She never did. I packed that night. One suitcase. My laptop. A folder of documents no one in that house had ever bothered to ask about. As I stepped outside, the door closed behind me with quiet finality. He thought he had stripped me of security, status, identity. What he didn't realize was that I had already built something that didn't require his name. The first night alone wasn't dramatic. No tears. No frantic calls. No desperate apologies. I rented a small apartment in Stamford under an LLC I had quietly registered a year earlier. No one from my family knew it existed. They never asked enough questions to find out. But isolation has weight. When the noise of expectation disappears, you're left with your own thoughts, and mine were loud. Not with doubt. With calculation. I replayed every dinner conversation. Every dismissal. Every time Daniel was rescued from consequences. Patterns began connecting like code. My father didn't just favor my brother. He protected him. Excessively. Why? Loyalty? Pride? Or something else? I opened my laptop that night and stared at a different world, lines of code, valuation algorithms, predictive modeling systems I had been building quietly for 2 years. While they thought I was buried in casebooks, I was building an AI platform capable of evaluating real estate portfolios in seconds, more accurately than traditional firms in weeks. I hadn't quit law school out of defeat. I had withdrawn strategically, 3 days after the gala. Let them think I collapsed. Silence creates comfort in your enemy. And comfort makes people careless. But I needed proof of how careless they really were. 6 months after I left, I signed the contract that changed everything. My AI platform, internally named Orion, had already secured private beta clients in commercial real estate. Hedge funds were using it quietly. Boutique firms were licensing it under non-disclosure agreements. No one connected it to me. That was intentional. When a Silicon Valley investment group offered to buy a minority stake, I didn't hesitate. I negotiated hard. No vanity valuation. No inflated projections. Just clean numbers and long-term leverage. The transfer hit my account in staggered deposits. By the time the final wire cleared, my net worth sat at $65 million. I didn't call my parents. I didn't post about it. I booked a one-way flight to California. The Malibu mansion wasn't about luxury. It was about distance. Glass walls facing the Pacific. Privacy. Space to think. While my father toasted Daniel's brilliant trajectory at country clubs, I signed escrow papers overlooking the ocean. I could have confronted him then. I could have walked into Whitmore and Hale and revealed everything. But victory is fragile when revealed too early. So I chose patience. Because real power isn't proving them wrong. It's letting them build their own downfall without knowing you're watching. And soon, they would give me exactly what I needed. From Malibu, distance sharpened everything. Through legal newsletters, public filings, and discreet industry contacts, I watched Whitmore and Hale expand aggressively. New hires. Larger office space. Riskier clients. My father gave interviews about the next generation of leadership, always with Daniel beside him. To outsiders, they were thriving. But growth without discipline leaves fingerprints. Daniel began appearing in quiet online complaints, delayed disbursements, inconsistent reporting, clients unable to reconcile escrow balances. Nothing explosive. Just irregular. I didn't react. I studied. The psychology was familiar. My father believed control meant concealment. If something threatened the firm, he would bury it, not confront it. Daniel, desperate to maintain Golden Sun status, would double down rather than confess weakness. That combination is combustible. I pulled property records and saw something interesting. Their family home had been refinanced. Substantial leverage. Why would a conservative litigator risk personal assets unless liquidity was tightening? I felt no satisfaction. Not yet. Just confirmation. They still believed I had disappeared into irrelevance. A failed daughter living quietly somewhere, probably embarrassed. That illusion protected me more effectively than any NDA ever could. But illusions collapse when pressure builds. And pressure was building fast. The question wasn't whether something would break. It was who would break first. I spent months observing, noting every flaw like a chess player mapping the board. Every late-night champagne toast, every casual remark in meetings, every overconfidence in Daniel's emails became data. He was reckless. Predictable. And he didn't even realize how exposed he was. Charles, on the other hand, hid his anxiety behind poise and protocol. But pride makes people blind. I could see the tension behind the smiles, the way his hands shook slightly while signing documents, the way he avoided questions about liquidity. The more I watched, the more patterns emerged. Daniel's debts weren't accidental, they were systematic. Client funds diverted into luxury purchases, quick loans, and failed schemes no one in the office questioned, because no one dared. And yet, the firm's failure wasn't visible to the world. Not yet. It was only visible to someone willing to see it without emotion. I resisted the urge to act. Every instinct in me screamed to call authorities, confront them, reclaim my family home immediately. But that would be impulsive. Amateurish. Strategy required silence. Patience. Observation until the perfect moment. So I waited. Not quietly, intensely. Recording, calculating, predicting. Every misstep Daniel made was a piece of a puzzle he couldn't even see forming. And I wondered, silently, how long before they finally realized I was never powerless. It began with a small loan, $50,000. Daniel called, claiming he needed it for urgent client expenses. I could hear the panic barely hidden beneath his practiced charm. I didn't ask questions. I didn't lecture. I just agreed, under one condition, he would sign over his portion of the family inheritance as collateral. He laughed, thinking it was a joke. The golden son, careless and entitled, never reading the fine print. I sent the signed documents electronically. The system registered the transfer. Legally binding. Completely invisible to him. Meanwhile, I quietly began buying the mortgage on the Whitmore family home through a series of shell companies I controlled. By the time anyone noticed, I already owned the debt. Every transaction was silent, methodical. No confrontations. No drama. Just leverage. I watched as Daniel continued to flaunt his Rolexes and social media vacations, oblivious to the fact that his brotherly shield, the one my father relied on, was slipping through my hands. At home, Charles remained convinced I was still lost. He toasted Daniel's name publicly, unaware that the woman he dismissed was already orchestrating their downfall from miles away. And in the quiet of my Malibu office, I whispered to myself, I'm not here to fight him head-on. I'm here to watch the empire crumble under its own weight. But even with the first piece in place, the game was far from over. The real test was keeping them blind until the final move. 6 months into my silent campaign, a complication arose. A junior associate from Whitmore and Hale, one of Daniel's blind spots, had noticed irregular transactions in client accounts. She began asking questions, polite at first, then insistent. If she connected the dots, my plan could unravel before it even began. I couldn't intervene directly without exposing myself. Instead, I studied her patterns. Meetings, emails, the way she reported concerns. She wasn't malicious if she was thorough, which made her dangerous. So I adapted. I created small diversions, delayed memos, slight misdirections in publicly visible filings, subtle confirmations that lulled her into complacency. Every move was invisible, legal, and precise. Meanwhile, Daniel grew bolder, taking bigger risks, believing his sister was out of the picture entirely. He was like a moth dancing closer to the flame, and I was ready to wait until the heat consumed him. I sat on my terrace overlooking the Pacific, watching the sunset, letting the tension build. There was a strange thrill in knowing I was inches away from the perfect collapse, yet still untouchable. And I reminded myself, quietly. Patience isn't weakness. It's the weapon they'll never see coming. But even as the puzzle pieces aligned, one question haunted me: would they realize their reckoning was inevitable, or would it shock them completely when it arrived? Maintaining invisibility came at a cost. I had opportunities to accelerate the plan, confront Daniel, alert authorities, seize the home immediately, but acting too soon would expose me. So I made sacrifices quietly. Social invitations went unanswered. Old friends assumed I'd vanished. Even personal comforts were delayed. I postponed upgrades to my Malibu mansion, tightened my own budget, lived smaller than necessary, all to keep the illusion of distance and harmlessness intact. Every sacrifice was psychological warfare against myself. The isolation was heavy, the nights long. Sometimes I doubted if the patience would feel worth it, if the careful silence would truly deliver justice. Yet, each day confirmed the psychology I had studied for years: arrogance and entitlement are blindfolds. Daniel's mismanagement worsened. Charles ignored warning signs, too proud to question his son, too focused on appearances. I realized something vital: the cost wasn't just money or time. It was my emotional labor, the control over my own impulses. I could have screamed, demanded recognition, confronted the lies. But I didn't. Because vengeance is most devastating when it arrives unannounced. And I reminded myself, with quiet certainty. They think I've lost. They've already lost. I just need to finish the game, carefully. One wrong move, and all the months of strategy could collapse. But the tension, the waiting, it was part of the design. The question now, when silence breaks, will they recognize who holds the power? The pieces were in place. Daniel's debts, misappropriated client funds, and reckless spending were all documented. Charles's pride prevented him from acting. The house, refinanced and leveraged, was legally vulnerable. And I held the key. I arranged a quiet meeting with Daniel, under the guise of helping him with a personal loan. He signed the papers, unaware he was handing over his portion of the inheritance, the legal leverage I needed to claim the family home. Simultaneously, through shell companies, I purchased the mortgage. Every legal document, every transaction, was airtight. No loopholes. No chance for appeal. Then I compiled the evidence: forged signatures, client fund diversions, pyramid schemes. Every email, every financial record, meticulously catalogued. I sent it anonymously to the Connecticut Bar Association. And finally, the moment arrived. I drove to the house, the same one that had once been a symbol of my father's dominance. Keys in hand, letters in envelope, evidence stored securely. I rang the doorbell. Charles and Daniel opened the door, smug as ever. "I'm here to deliver a notice," I said softly. "The property is now legally mine. You have 30 days to vacate." They froze. Shock froze their words. Pride froze their movements. For the first time, they realized the woman they dismissed had orchestrated their undoing. And all I said next was, "I am the company that owns this debt." The silence that followed was deafening. The room felt impossibly small. Charles's jaw tightened, Daniel's eyes darted, searching for a loophole that didn't exist. Margaret's hands gripped the railing, silent witness to the collapse of the world she had once called stability. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg for recognition. I simply let the evidence speak. Every email, every forged signature, every diverted dollar, meticulously catalogued, was ready for the Connecticut bar. "You think I was ever powerless?" I asked softly, pacing the polished floors of the house that had once symbolized their dominance. "I wasn't even in your game. I built my own." Daniel turned red, sputtering excuses. Charles tried to assert control, but words felt hollow, meaningless against contracts and court filings. Their legacy, the fortress they had built on entitlement and sexism, crumbled silently around them. I handed the notice to Charles. His hands shook. Not with age, but with the recognition of what he had lost. Daniel, the golden son, realized his privileges were illusions. My mother said nothing, as always, watching her family unravel without intervening. For the first time, they understood, the daughter they had underestimated was not only capable, she was unstoppable. And as I stepped onto the veranda, looking at the Pacific horizon, I whispered to myself. I never needed to shout. I just needed to wait. The question lingered in the air, heavy and clear: who really held the power in that house? The house was quiet. Too quiet. Charles sold the firm's remaining assets to cover debts. Daniel negotiated a plea deal, avoiding jail, but losing everything: his license, his status, even his freedom to live as the golden son. He now worked in a car rental, a reminder of privilege squandered. Margaret followed them silently, her complicity unshaken, her voice never breaking an apology. I walked through the empty halls of the house I had once been expelled from. Every polished floorboard, every family portrait, Every echo of ridicule had been transformed into evidence of my strategy, my patience, my triumph. I wasn't just reclaiming a home. I was reclaiming my identity. I sold the property quietly, transferring $50 million into a fund to support women in real estate technology, the very field I had pioneered, the field my father had dismissed as unsuitable for me. The victory wasn't in wealth. It wasn't in humiliation. It was in freedom. In the quiet assertion that I could build, unassisted, a legacy they could never touch. I had played the long game, and in silence, I had won. As I stood on my new terrace in Malibu, watching the sun melt into the ocean, I understood, the world doesn't need to hear your roar to recognize your power. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than anything else. And I whispered to the wind. I wasn't expelled because I was weak. I was expelled because I was stronger than they could bear. And now, I am unstoppable. The question remained for anyone listening: how many victories in life are waiting quietly, unseen, because people underestimate the silent ones? If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. It shows that silence can be more powerful than shouting. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated and proven people wrong without them even realizing it? And don't forget to subscribe. This channel shares stories that aren't just entertainment, but reminders of strength, strategy, and the quiet ways we can change our own destiny.